Good evening. Welcome to this online event from the British Library. Wherever you're watching from around the country and around the world, it's great to have you with us, whether you're watching us live or whether you're watching on the catch-up version. So tonight we have an event called The Map of the Future with Tim Marshall, and it's a special event to accompany the current exhibition at the British Library called Secret Maps. That exhibition is open until the 18th of January, so a perfect thing to do over Christmas or the new year. And it's an exhibition that aims to reveal the stories hidden behind some of the history's most mysterious maps and cover the invisible forces that distort the world around us. So it looks at power, it looks at coercion and secrecy, who owns the power, who owns the knowledge, and everything that lies behind maps. And it features such a brilliant range drawn from our collection and lots of other things that we've brought in right from the 14th century to the present day. So that's Secret Maps at the British Library on now. So tonight we have a speaker that many of you will know, and that's why you're here, Tim Marshall. So Tim is a leading authority on foreign affairs, and he was a reporter for diplomatic editor for Sky News, was worked at the BBC, LBC Radio. He reported from all around the world, 40 countries, and he covered conflicts from Croatia, former Yugoslavia, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and so forth. So a real deep knowledge of the world. And then he turned that knowledge into the background to his best-selling book, of course, Prisoners of Geography. It was a runaway bestseller. Recently has been brought out in a new and updated edition, and then books such as The Power of Geography and The Future of Geography, which followed them up. And Tim tonight will be doing a short presentation, some thoughts on what the future map of the world will look like, and certain case studies there. And then we'll be talking to our co-host tonight, or our chair tonight, Myra Anubi. Myra is a journalist, award-winning solutions journalist and broadcaster, and she presents a show called People Fixing the World on BBC World Service, which it really picks out some amazing examples of people fixing the world from all manner of different countries. But she began her career in Kenya, and then since moving to the UK, she's worked with Times, with Spotify. She's a very well-regarded event host, as you'll see later, and covers all sorts of global change-making issues. So Myra will be joining the conversation later on. But as I said at the start, we'll first hear from Tim. And I'm also encourage you to ask your questions. Put your questions in the form below the video window. You can put them in there at any point during the conversation, and we'll get through as many as we can during the latter part of the event. So I hope our speakers enjoy the evening. And for now, I'm handing over to Tim.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you for the invitation to speak this evening. Thanks to Myra for agreeing to grill me to an inch of my life, and thanks for tuning in. Yeah, I'm a geopolitical nerd, if you like, and I'm also of the opinion that geography is one of the main determining factors in what happens. I'm not a geographic determinist. I don't believe that geography is destiny, but it is seriously one of the big parts of why things happen. And I'm just going to go through a few slides, 10, 15 minutes, and just to try to make my case. And the first one is a map of the world. And I use this one now because when I was growing up, of course, the map of the world was the Mercator map, the classic Mercator map. And that put Europe bang in the middle of the world. Now, of course, there is no middle on a globe, except for the inside. But conceptually, that's when the maps were drawn up, when Europe conceptually, militarily, diplomatically, economically, it was the center of the world, but it isn't anymore. That's the new center of the world, the Indo-Pacific. And I think it's very important to use visuals to get concepts across. And I'd ask you to keep in mind that map and the fact that we're not center of the world. I mean, it was great when we were. There was Europe. In the middle of the middle, there was Britain. And in the middle of that was its capital city, Leeds. And all was right with the world. But the world's moved on. And this is my main point. The world's moved on, and the Americans are more aware of it than we are, because the Americans are focused pretty laser-like on the center of the world, Indo-Pacific, which is exactly why we're having all our angst with the United States' current policies. And I say current, I suspect future policies. I believe strongly we're in a new era. And it's a new era which echoes back to an older era. It's actually the Americans returning to the norm. The norm for the United States goes all the way back to George Washington's farewell address, in which he said, "Don't entangle yourselves with those Europeans. They're forever causing trouble with each other, and we don't want to get involved." And they stuck to that for more than 150 years. They didn't want to come to the First World War, but were dragged in 1917. They didn't want to come to the Second World War, were dragged in. And then felt they had to stay on for the Cold War. But something has completely changed in all that. They came and stayed to defend Europe so that no one power would arise, Soviets basically, and dominate it and then threaten them. But in this new time, it's pretty obvious that's not going to happen. And so why are they going to hang around? And so, I mean, there is a belligerence and a swagger to the current administration, but don't mistake that for a temporary thing. The Americans have moved on. The Americans are reverting back to that norm where they are laser-like both on Latin America, which they regard as their backyard, but also the Indo-Pacific. And if we still conceptually think of Europe as being in the center of the world, missing a trick. So they're a bit belligerent, the current administration. They like to rename a map the Gulf of Mexico, and I have a response to that. Now, that's not going to happen either, but two can play at that game. Just again to frame things, ways of looking at the world. Did you ever know that Britain was here? Britain, we never think of it ourselves as sort of side on to that massive area. And I just put that up there as a bit of fun. I mean, it also tells you a lot about one of the reasons we were able to go and rob the world blind. If you look at our coastline, it's jagged. Jagged coastlines equal deep water ports, usually. And deep water ports means big ships. They can go a long way. And of course, in times gone by, they were built of wood. And what do we have a lot of? Wood. Oak, in fact. And when we switch to coal fire, what have we got a lot of? And we've got direct access to the sea lanes. This is one of the examples I have of how geography partially determines what happens. Ways of looking at the world. Did you know that Portugal is one of the biggest countries in the European Union? If you look at it like this. The shaded area is the EEZ, Exclusive Economic Zone. As I'm sure most of you have a copy of the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea by your bedside, you probably know that 200 miles from your shoreline is your EEZ. And if you look at it, unless of course, like France and Britain, it's 20 miles, so you have 10 miles each. If you look at the world like that, through that particular prism, Portugal's huge. So let's come to the present and my best example of how geography partially determines history, and that's Russia. And it's also tied in with the first map of the world and tied in with this idea that we're in a new time. It's not the Cold War, obviously, but it's not actually the post-Cold War anymore. We actually moved on from that. This new era doesn't have a name yet. If you look at Russia, it's very, very big. There's an awful lot of distance you can pull back into if anybody was stupid enough to invade you, which is exactly what the Russians have always done. But it's also very cold. If you look at the top there, the ports that they have, some of them freeze, not all of them do, but all of the Russian ships have to go up through the ice pack before they get into the oceans. And they feel quite hemmed in. Now you can come out of the Baltic, see at the top between Sweden and Finland, but you have to go past about 7 NATO powers to do that. You feel quite hemmed in. You can come out the Black Sea from Sebastopol, but you've got to go through the Bosphorus, which Turkey controls, and they're a NATO power, and it's only a mile wide. They feel quite hemmed in. One warm water port on lease from Ukraine, or it was, only had 25 years. So when Ukraine flips, Russians get nervous. It doesn't justify their actions, but it partially explains it through geography. And the other thing briefly is the North European plain. If you look at the P in Poland and then come down, you see the Caucasus Mountains. That's the narrowest gap of the North European plain. And this is flatland. North European plain starts in France, narrows through Poland, opens up again in front of Moscow and St. Petersburg. And so if Napoleon went through that gap, and if, as he did, the Germans went through in 1914 and again in 1941, and many other countries, of course the Russians have gone the other way, that makes Poland a pretty important piece of real estate. And it's why Poland changes shape and disappears off the map. So plan A, occupy Poland for the Russians. Plan B, if you can't, and you can't after the Cold War, fall back to that flat land in front of you, Belarus and Ukraine. If Ukraine, the biggest buffer, wants to flip into the Western sphere of friendship, I'm not saying it's inevitable because of geography that you invade Ukraine. I'm saying that short of Russia being a liberal democracy, because of that geography and the history that has happened on that geography, you'll invade Ukraine. If we go to the shaded area, you see it goes all the way to the Urals. The shaded area is flat. Now, Putin's biggest mistake after invading Ukraine was not even getting to Kyiv and being stopped a few miles out of it. And this is key to this new time. If you're the United States and you stayed on in Europe in order to rebuild the Europeans because we were on our knees and help defend us, well, it's not like that anymore, is it? We're not on our knees anymore. There's 600 million of us. There's only 350 million Americans. And the Polish leader, Tusk, put it very well. He said the Americans are asking themselves, wait, why are 350 million Americans underwriting and subsidizing 600 million Europeans to defend themselves against 160 million Russians? And the game's up. And this year, we have seen that. And it was spelt out in the National Security Strategy, which the Americans issued this weekend. Basically, it just said, you guys get on with it, pay for it, and we'll still be your friends. If we don't get on with it and we don't pay for it, we'll pay for it in the long term, and they won't be our friends. So big stakes. While I'm on Russia, a new thing, talking about borders, sea routes. I mean, it's kind of roughly connected to borders, but it is also the future. This Northern Sea route, if you take it, because the ice pack is melting because of climate change, you knock a week off the travel time for getting your goods to market. So that's a week less insurance and a week less fuel costs and a week less in crew costs. So, of course, you know the future. More and more ships are going to go that way across the decades, and fewer ships are going to go the other route. And imagine the effect of that over 10, 20, 30 years on Egypt and the revenue it gets from the Suez Canal. So it's always useful to be looking at these things. Right, moving on our tour de monde to China, or as it's sometimes pronounced these days, China. Useful to look at the world from China's perspective. In front of it is a wall of Friends of America. And they're only in the sea, they're not in the ocean. This wall, Japan, which has history with China, and also has the American 7th Fleet in the Bay of Tokyo, and it has 40,000 American troops, and it's a treaty ally. South Korea, treaty ally, 30,000 American troops. Philippines, treaty ally, basing rights for the Americans. All the others, friends. Taiwan, friends. This is the geographic underpinning of China's obsession with Taiwan. There's a lot more to it, including nationalism, returning to the motherland, and all that sort of stuff, and the super semiconductor chip factory. But it's also geographic. Break that wall, nobody can blockade you, and you then have direct access to the oceans, not just the seas. It's not just about Taiwan, though. It's about the whole of the South China Sea, which China says, remember what it's called? It's called the South China Sea. And there's all these overlapping claims within the South China Sea. The Chinese have drawn a lot of red lines on this map. The cow's tongue, it's called. And everything inside it, they say, is theirs. So that's the Paracel Islands. which I think Vietnam claims. There's the Spratly Islands, which the Philippines claims. And this is probably the biggest flashpoint of the 21st century. And in the event that the Americans just gave up on Taiwan, at that point, everybody else except Japan would have to give up as well and start leaning towards China. Because if they're not going to help Taiwan, they're not going to help anybody, which is actually one of the reasons why they do help Taiwan and might even fight for it. I don't think it will come to that, but they might. So when you see stuff happening in the South China Sea that's to do with Taiwan, it's to do with something bigger. So far, so depressing. I have good news. Somebody's coming along to help us, and she's going to sort it all out. AI, before it turns us into paper clips and eats us, ushers in, allegedly, a brand new era of productivity and prosperity across the world. I don't buy that. I think it will usher in a new industrial revolution, and there will be lots of prosperity, but I'm not sure it'll be global. And there's lots of reasons for that, including geographic ones to do with water and electricity production. But this is the key tech battleground of the 21st century. Who's making the best chips? The super semiconductors. China's a couple of years behind, at least, minimum, at least. But the super semiconductors, shorthand for tech in general, but they are the key to decision making, including in the military. And the faster your chips are, and the more you have of them, the more kit you've got. And the AI is making those decisions faster than your opponent. You win, they lose. Which is why where the stuff to make super semiconductors and all the other stuff we need, the copper, the lithium, this is a new map of the world. This is a 21st century map of the world. A 19th century map of the world would have showed you where the coal was. 20th, oil and gas. Still important, will be for at least 3 decades, minimum. But this stuff. And when you know that these are the new maps of the world, and then it's easier to follow the stuff that often isn't in the news. It doesn't make the news because it's too big and yet too detailed simultaneously. I'll give you an example, the Lobito corridor in Angola. And Zambia is doing a very good job of leveraging its copper and, to a lesser extent, its lithium, because it's relatively well governed, relatively stable, relatively innovative, good education system, turning out some really good workers. DRC, not so much. And the DRC is not leveraging what it's got, which the world wants, because it's just armed factions creaming it. Well, not even creaming off the top, creaming the whole lot. So unfortunately, DRC, the people are not really benefiting, but Zambia has a real chance of becoming a big power player. But also, if you look at the Lobito corridor, and that's the corridor going from the center to the left to Lobito port. Again, geography. The Americans and the Europeans have helped build the corridor to get all the stuff out to the port, into the Atlantic, towards Europe and America. But of course, the Chinese have done exactly the same, going the other direction. And this, again, is one of the economic and diplomatic battlegrounds. It is sort of a new scramble for Africa. It's very different. And when we go there, we go hopefully as equals and as partners, as opposed to thieves, which is what we mostly were in previous times. But again, it's just interesting ways of looking at the world and seeing what's going on. Greenland, as I almost wrap up, it's very easy to laugh at Trump. Not with him, at him. But I think it's a mistake. He's not stupid. They're not stupid. They know what they're doing. They have a plan. I don't know if it's going to work. And there's 2 examples I'll give you. One is the Panama Canal and the hysteria earlier this year. Oh my God, he's going to invade the Panama. No, he's not. All they did was breathe on the Panama government quite heavily. And the 2 Chinese companies that control the ports on each end of the Panama Canal sold to an American company. You don't need to invade them. And he's not going to invade Greenland either. That's one of the reasons he wants Greenland. I mean, there's lots of other strategic reasons to do with the military, but it's also where the stuff of the 21st century is. So it's no good laughing at him, because nobody laughed at Truman in, I think it was late 50s, President Truman. He tried to buy Greenland. Nobody thought he was an idiot. It is a obvious, logical, strategic position. And what he's done is position America to become the big brother of Greenland if it becomes independent, which it might. They know what they're doing. It's such a mistake to think they're all buffoons, because the buffoons will slide past you and you'll be lost in their tail dust. Now, if it does become every man for himself, because the Americans, as we see from the next slide, are making great strides. It's very fashionable to write them off. Top 10 tech companies in the world, they're on the right. Top universities, most of them on the right. Top economy, it's on the right. Who spends the most on R and research and development on the military? It's on the right. I could go on. GDP, EU and America in the crash of 2008, pretty much equal. GDP 2025, double the EU's. We've been on holiday, a holiday from history. It's over. Now, if it does become every man for itself, I do have a slide to leave you with and a vision of the future. Thank you very much.
Lovely. What a great way to start.
Thank you, Maya.
Good evening, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us today. I'm actually really thrilled to be part of this on behalf of the British Library, where we will be exploring the future map of the world. And if you have had a chance to see the Secret Maps exhibition, what a treat. I happened to see the oldest map of my birth country, Kenya, which was quite exciting. But I also ended up seeing a map that was made of silk. And one that ended up actually being an escape map on lingerie. So, I mean, maps are very exciting. They are imaginative. They are a reflection of different things, different forms, revealing what people feared, what they desire, what they're trying to control, and in many cases, also what they're trying to hide. I think maps are, they're mirrors, they're puzzles, they are promises, and they can also be lies. And that's why I think it's really special tonight that we get to speak to someone who's dedicated himself to kind of decoding those lies and revealing truths. That's you, Tim, from all the books, The Prisoners of Geography, Power and Geography, and most recently, The Future of Geography. You've helped us understand the world, which can be really confusing and sometimes chaotic. Unfortunately, I've just found out he's a Leeds supporter, so he's not perfect. But he can write and he can help us understand many things. So Tim, thank you. I'm happy that we're having this discussion. When I was thinking about this, I think I would describe you as the Gordon Ramsay of geography. Allow me to explain, right?
I'm not going to swear.
Okay. Because you go into these spaces and you're able to identify the geopolitical mess, right? As Gordon Ramsay would probably in a kitchen, and actually identify why a place is on fire, so to say, and then somehow tell us very bluntly, right, what's going on. But also you have a way of putting together weird and wonderful ingredients, so conflict, politics, history, culture, and even space, and helping us by presenting these palatable books that kind of help us digest what's going on in our world. And for me, when I'm thinking about the future map of the world, the first question would be, will there be a future map of the world? We have conflicts increasingly. The world seems more polarized. And then, of course, we have climate change. I suppose the first question would be, are we heading towards a world where borders become more fluid and unstable? Or do you actually think the map as we know it today will endure?
I think the world has always been fluid, and sadly, many points in our long history and recorded history of roughly 10 to 12,000 years, we've been in conflict at times. I mean, the reason we know the dates is because that's the time we were in conflict, but most of the time we're not. So it's not that different now than it ever has been. And I think it's important to internalize that and not to think, the sky is falling. But, your question about maps and the borders is a very good one, though, because we have actually entered, well, we are in 80 years of very few borders changing, very few. After the shock of the Second World War, the Europeans have not changed mostly their borders. There have been examples. Kosovo is one, and of course Ukraine is another one at the moment. The African Union, I think, was very wise when dealt what was a very bad hand of colonialism, drawing artificial borders. I think the African Union elders were very wise when they said, we're not going to redraw them, because if we open up that kind of worms, it will be perpetual conflict. Biafra in Nigeria is a very good example. And there are still tensions on borders, Nigeria and Cameroon, I think it is, for example. English-speaking people just down in the corner. Yeah, there are many examples like that. But they have held as well, apart from South Sudan, which managed to carve itself out of Sudan. And you look around at other parts of the world, and in fact, the borders have held. Now, the future. Well, it's pretty obvious that de facto or de jure, the border of Ukraine is going to change. I mean, de facto, it has changed already. And there will be other examples. I mean, Thailand and Cambodia are having a border dispute at the moment. Western Sahara and the issues with Algeria and other neighbors is an open question. But I've given you, I could probably only give you 7 or 8 examples out of 193 countries where I think there is a potential for change. So I actually think for all the problems that we have, most of the borders, most of them will hold.
Right. And it's interesting you talk about change, and it's something you've just mentioned. There's a growing movement from the Correct the Map campaign that's actually backed by the African Union, like you said, to change the old projection of maps and replace them with maps like Earth Equal, one that finally shows the true size of continents like Africa,
Yes.
and one that also challenges the old colonial distortions of maps that we use today. So if
Yeah.
we start changing maps that we use every day, do you think that this would reshape the future and our understanding of global power?
I'm not sure how much it would shape the future, but I think you're right if you agree that it would help us conceptually understand. I mean, there's the Peters map, which if people have not seen the Peters map, it's worth looking it up, because the classic Mercator map shows Greenland and Africa as being roughly the same size, but Africa is 11 times bigger than Greenland.
Yeah.
And so conceptually, we don't understand just how massive this continent is. And but the Peters map, and it's also a lot longer, I wouldn't say thinner, but it's a lot longer than our classic understanding of it is. And instead of having it as a sort of blob, when you see that, you get this understanding of how the different cultures and climates that as you go down through it. So I think that these maps becoming more widely known would help us understand that particular continent. Another wonderful map you can see is the languages. I mean, the Europeans have quite a lot of languages, but Africa, it's something, well, there's hundreds of pretty big languages, and then there's about 3,000 when you start picking those apart. And again, those, sorry, you've just reminded me of something else, Myra. If you look at the Bantu language,
Yeah.
and how it comes down through Africa, where organically, if it had grown up the way that Europe had over centuries and centuries and centuries of the borders, I mean, let's face it, we did fight each other for these borders, and Africans actually have also fought each other since time immemorial for their borders. The Malian Empire was not, not forged through peace and love. But when you look at the Bantu language, just as one example, that is what probably might have happened organically over centuries, there would have been a Bantu-speaking nation, which would have been more cohesive than leaving different Bantu peoples inside these artificial borders. And I don't think, you know, I think there is a statute of limitations on the responsibility for colonialism, but I don't think it's run out yet.
Mhm.
I think you've got to look at cultures and leaders for the negativities that they have produced in some of those countries, but you cannot overlook the enormity of the problem of trying to build a cohesive society. Nigeria is a great example. When you put 17 nations into it and tell them they're all one people and say, right, off you go, good luck. And when you put it in those terms, Africa's actually hasn't done as bad a job as it could have done.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I'm just going to jump into some of the questions that are already coming in and remind everyone that you can send your questions in. David says, who determines the boundaries of the state, i.e., Poland, that has been moved east and west by others, but how is the nation state defined? And also, what about the South China Sea and the augmented islands and the eel?
Okay. Okay. Well, let's take Poland first of all. Okay, might as well just flip back to the Russia map, just for even though it's not of Poland, but Russia's on it. Well, Poland has changed shape so many times, and it's actually disappeared off the map sometimes, and that's because it's on the superhighway of armies going east and west. That's why I mentioned the North European plain. But these are its current borders, and they look destined to be that way for the foreseeable future. But there are bits of Ukraine that used to be in Poland, and Kaliningrad, which you see just above the D in Poland,
Mhm.
well, that used to be part of Germany, part of Prussia, I believe. Königsberg, wasn't it? And that was also part of Poland, if I got my history right. So they do change. But they changed nearly always through warfare. And the shock of the Second World War meant that we decided we're not going to do things like that anymore, which is why it's such a big deal what Russia is doing, changing borders by force at the moment. So who decides? Well, previously armies decided, armies and governments. But then when you have decided, you then apply to become a nation state that is recognized at the United Nations. And that requires your definition of your borders, which you present to the United Nations. And it means that your neighbors say, yeah, actually, you know what, we agree with that. And then you become a member of the United Nations, and those are your inviolable borders. South Sudan tore itself away from Sudan, but they had to then both go to the United Nations and both agree, yes, we have no more territorial designs on this territory. This is agreed. Of course, people change them. South China Sea is more complicated. If we go to the South China Sea map, again, this is why I put in that particular map, because you've got the 99 dash, which I refer to as the cow's tongue. If we can move on to South China Sea map. The Spratly Islands is a good example. Now, again, this is actually, sadly, another throwback to colonialism. The Scarborough Shoal, as far as I know, neither the Filipinos or the Vietnamese or the Chinese and all the others that claim it have ever been to Scarborough. So why is it called the Scarborough Shoal? Colonialism. But this is, again, why I mentioned the EEZ, the exclusive economic zones. Now, they don't fall within China's unless China says, well, actually, we have got these little islands that we do control, and therefore 200 miles from those islands, that means that's our sovereign territory. And you can take this to the UN, or you can take it to there's a global body, IMO, based in London, just south of Westminster Bridge, I think. And they can adjudicate and rule, and then you can agree to it. So let's say it was categorical, Spratly Islands are Filipino. The Chinese can then say, okay, we agree. As it happens, they say, no, we don't agree. this is how complicated it gets. I'll give you one last example. We don't have a map. There's a reason the Aegean is called the Greek Sea. And that's because, again, because of history and warfare, notably the First World War, Greek sovereign territory and the islands of Greece, there's more than 6,000 of them, more than 100 are inhabited, go all the way across the Aegean. And the closest Greek island to Turkey, from memory, is roughly 10 miles away. And then there's other ones further up. And what this means for the Turks is that because you share it, if it's just 10 miles or 100 miles, you get 50 miles each. It means that Greek sovereign waters only run for 10 miles out into the sea that they border. Their exclusive economic zone, is 10 miles. Whereas Greek, they've got the whole of the Aegean because of all the islands. So it's really complicated. Forgive me for that really complicated answer. But if you're talking about recognized borders, it's pretty much UN. But then when you get into the details, it starts to get complicated.
Well, I'm afraid there are only more complicated questions coming your way. I'll pick something here from Anushri Gupta, who says, what do you think about Europe or the West's characterization of China as an overly aggressive or styling itself as the anti-US power? And do we miss the nuance or the bigger picture of what China is actually trying to accomplish geopolitically?
I think it's economically aggressive. It's not yet in a position to be militarily aggressive. That might come in 10, 20 years' time, but they simply are not a match yet for the United States militarily. They're nowhere near it. When they are, at that point, they will say, we've been telling you for all these years not to do this, that, and there here, and now we mean it. But they can't say that yet. So they're not an aggressive power, and they're not seeking land other than Taiwan. What they're seeking to do is what the Americans did, well, what the British, what all empires do. You plant yourself around your empire, you get bits of concrete, and a real map of the United States would show the United States, and then it would show the base in Guam and the listening station at Fylingdales near Scarborough, and Suba Bay near Crete, where they have a naval base, and it would show Ramstein in Germany, and it would show the air base they've got. That's the real map of the United States. And the real map of China, they're doing the same thing. They've now got a base down the tip of Sri Lanka. They're building ports, Tanzania, Kenya as well, I believe. Not military, but almost certainly designed for dual purpose. It gets complicated, but it's how you design the wharf and the docking, and there's ways that you can build it that will allow not just commercial ships, but also warships. And they're clearly building dual-use ports. They have got a military base in Djibouti on the Red Sea, a critical place. So they are following that pattern. But they definitely do not seek territory. The Chinese the Han Chinese were colonialists. They took Manchuria from the Manchurians. They took Tibet from the Tibetans. They took Xinjiang province from the Uyghur Muslims. They took Inner Mongolia from the Mongolians. But I think they're done for now. So they're aggressive economically. Why not? Why shouldn't they be? They're a great power. I think it comes down to, do you think they are a benign force in the world or a malign force in the world? I mean, they clearly are deep inside the United Kingdom. They're deep inside our universities. And the reason for that is that they want to exert as much control as they can over us. But this is nothing special about the Chinese. You know, every country in the world behaves like that. It's just that they're bigger than most countries.
Right. And sticking with that aggression and control, Robert says, do you think it's likely that with the opening up of the Northern Passage with climate change, Russia will become stronger and build on its current position and be again a superpower as it was during the Cold War?
I think, well, Robert's probably familiar with the phrase upper volta with rockets. From memory, this was in the 50s. I think upper volta became Mali. I'm not sure. Anyway, it was upper volta, which I think is now Mali. Forgive me if I'm wrong. And somebody at the time said Russia is upper volta with rockets, and it still is. Um, it doesn't innovate. Its economy is a basket case. Doesn't make anything that anybody wants. Um, it's not a superpower. The Soviet Union was because it was the Russian Empire, but they haven't got an empire anymore. I mean, they're trying to recreate it, but it's not going to happen the way it did. I mean, Putin's on record as saying the Soviet Union was another name for the Russian Empire. You know, they don't have that reach, that scope, that flexibility that being controlling Kazakhstan, for example, gave them, controlling Poland, controlling Hungary. They don't have that anymore. They're a regional power. And if it wasn't for nuclear weapons, we wouldn't be particularly that bothered about them either way. So I don't believe they will become a superpower again. Um, on the Northern Sea route and the Northern Passage, yes, absolutely to Russia's advantage. They will leverage it. They will make money out of it. People will have to pay to use those passages, to dock in their ports, to go through their channels, and it will be lucrative for them. And why not? Most of it is their EEZ or indeed their sovereign waters. They're perfectly entitled to do it. And they'll leverage it militarily as well. And I think the Northern Sea route will become an area of tension, not war necessarily, but tension. So yeah, they're going to do very well out of it. And they've got 35 icebreakers. America's got 2.5. And one of them doesn't work most of the time anyway. So no, they're very well placed to take advantage. And the oil and the gas that's up there, um, which may become available because of climate change. Yeah, I mean, this is what I mean about the news not always telling you exactly what's going on. I mean, I understand that. They've got 30 minutes or, you know, the newspaper's got so many pages. You can't be doing all these intricate, perhaps dull explainers. But the real action is where the news isn't, and that's on things like the Northern Sea route.
Mm-hmm. And can you, this is from Pauline Baba Yode. She says, can you comment on Cuba, 90 miles off the US coast, but with infrastructure and communication networks being built and invested in by the Chinese?
Yeah.
Is that a threat to the US?
Uh, I hate the phrase yes and no, but yes and no. I mean, obviously, Barbara, was it? Sorry.
This is Pauline.
Sorry, Colleen. You'll be aware of 1962 and the Cuban Missile Crisis. If the Russians had wanted to put some tractors there, it wouldn't have been a problem. But the Russians wanted to put some missiles there, which could have been armed with nuclear tips and were 90 miles from Florida. And that means, and all the other missiles they had, what they could have done was close the Gulf of America, as I believe it might, no, the Gulf of Mexico. And the most important port in America by a country mile is New Orleans. And then to get out of New Orleans into the ocean, you've got to go past Cuba. And if the Russians had been allowed to keep that, they theoretically could not only have fired nuclear missiles from 90 miles away, but they could have blockaded that port. That's why it got to the state it did, which was the closest, as far as we know, we've come to nuclear war. So if anybody ever tries that again, it'll be exactly the same. It is it would be a war or threat of war unless it was diffused. But the Chinese aren't doing that. And the Americans are not going to go to those lengths. They will do all they can to diminish Chinese and Russian influence in Cuba. But as long as the Chinese aren't going to try and stick missiles there, and I don't think they're that stupid, they won't. This is a good opportunity. I'll try and be brief, Myra. This is anyone that's really has trouble sleeping. Get out the national security strategy that was issued by the Americans over the weekend. And like I said at the beginning, it spells it out. It's the Monroe Doctrine. 1823, has gone back into fashion. The Monroe Doctrine is basically Europeans get out of our backyard, and that was then extended in 1904 by Teddy Roosevelt, to mean everybody get out of our backyard. Now you can argue till the cows come home, it's not your backyard or it is your backyard. That doesn't make any difference. The fact is they think it is.
Mhm.
And this new policy that they have is we're going back to the Monroe Doctrine, get out of our backyard. So the Chinese are not so stupid as to do that. As long as they keep it at a certain level, it won't become a crisis.
Well, let's just stick within this Cuba story here. Genny says, do you think the world is a more dangerous place than at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis?
No.
And should Greenland stay under the umbrella Denmark rather than go for
Well,
independence?
the second one's easy to answer, but I will expand on it, and that's for the Greenlanders to decide. All 56,000 of them, something like that. No, I don't think the world is more dangerous. I think it's less dangerous. Because there was a genuine ideological hair trigger, which was communism versus Americans' version of liberal democracy. And all these missiles were pointed at each other and fingers were on the triggers. And 62 showed us the world how close we could come. Now, since then, there's been a reduction. Now we still have enough nuclear weapons to kill us all several times. But we're no longer on a hair trigger. They're not actually up and pointing, most of them. Fingers aren't on the triggers. We are several layers down from where we were there. Yes, there are more nuclear-powered countries, but mad, mutually assured destruction held, and it is mad, but it held as a doctrine. I don't see where nuclear war, because you don't have to go straight to nuclear war. A lot of people just think, oh God, if we had a war with Russia, immediately it would be a nuclear war. It doesn't have to be. There's all sorts of levels. You climb up the escalatory ladder. So I don't think we are where we were in the 60s ideologically, physically. I think it's going to be interesting how everything plays out with the Chinese and the Russians. But no, I don't think it's more dangerous. I mean, it's a dangerous world, but then again, it always has done. Greenland. This is actually related to the first part of your question.
Yeah.
One of the reasons the Americans want Greenland, as well as the minerals we discussed, is that this is the shortest route for both Russian nuclear submarines to go under the ice pack, under Greenland, and surface on the North American coast near New York, for example, or ballistic missiles to go over the top. And they've only got one base there, the Americans, Thule, sorry. If you were to be the dominant power, not buy it, just be the dominant power, then you can build some more bases, more listening devices can be put down underneath to listen for the subs, more satellite tracking, you name it, it's to their benefit. It's another reason they want it. So it's entirely up to the Greenlanders. The Danes would not stand in their way if they, and this is actually what Trump's doing. This is what I mean. He's not an idiot. I mean, I know it's bluster but what he's done is put America in pole position that if Greenland goes for independence, and that is the direction of travel, especially from the local elections that were held this year, with the independence parties who don't say we'll immediately go for independence, but the ones that say that's the road we want to go down, they gained. And so in the event of it becoming independent, they can't last on their own, all 56,000 of them. They have to have a big brother. Now, at the moment, it's Denmark. But the amount of investment that the Americans might put in and the deals they would do, I mean, they've got similar deals in I think, is it the Marshall Islands? There's some Pacific islands that have a really good deal. You get visas, come and work here. We put investment and infrastructure in, but we do your foreign policy and we have basing rights. And that sort of deal would be on the table immediately if they became independent. And he's put them in the pole position to get it. I mean, it's looking ahead a few years, but I think it's quite a smart move. From, you know, I often remove morality from the thinking because it gets in the way of understanding sometimes.
Well, speaking of understanding, let's go to the Middle East. This one's from Catherine. Do you see any border changes in the Middle East?
It's a good question. ISIS drove a bulldozer through a sand berm that was the border between Syria and Iraq. And they said, we're destroying Sykes-Picot, which, as you probably know, was the infamous French-British agreement to carve up the region. But they failed, and those borders have held. And Iraq, this again goes back to colonialism. You know, Iraq, in broad brush terms, when the Turkish Empire, when they, you name the empires, all the Islamic empires, then the Turkish Empire, the Ottomans, and then the British Empire. Well, the Brits were the first ones to go along and think, right, this region up there, the mountainous region, with all these people who speak Kurdish and who are Kurds and are Sunni, and this middle region where everyone's predominantly Arabic and speaks Arabic and is Sunni, and then this bottom region where the marshes are and the Shatt al-Arab waterway where nearly everybody is Shia, well, that's all one space now, and you're all one country, and you're all called Iraqis. And everyone said, could you pronounce that, please? You're all Iraqis, now get on with it. And, you know, of course it has strained once we were smart or stupid enough to take the lid off with the removal of one of the 20th century's most brutal dictators, which was Saddam Hussein. But the borders have held. And Iraq's irredentist ambitions for Kuwait, which some of them regard as their 18th province, that didn't happen. The borders have held. I think the only border, I need to look at a map, but Syria, Turkey, that one might change because the Ottomans, which is the Turkish Empire, they controlled part of Syria as a vilayet, which was essentially they regarded it as part of Turkey, and they have a massive water problem between the two because the Turks are damming the Euphrates, which runs into Syria. So if I'm looking around the region, I think that's the only major border issue I can think of.
Well, Baraka, I believe, also says, you know, if you can speak on Israel's ongoing aggression, and specifically around Iran, Syria, what that would mean.
Well, they have no border designs on either. They're not going to change the border. In Syria, what they will attempt to do is party up with the Druze, Syrian Druze, and there's a lot of Israeli Druze. Many of them serve in the Israeli army and are very close to their Syrian cousins across the border. And they'll try and leverage that into a de facto area of control. So Israel, what they want is to control maybe as much as 20 miles in, all the way down this border between coming off the Golan Heights. Not to change the border de facto or de jure, but just to make sure that Damascus is not able to insert military forces into that area, which could then come across into Israel as they did in 73 and 67. So I think that'll be their plan. And of course, Syria is in no position whatsoever for the next few years to even be able to contemplate doing that. But powers do not think of the next they think of the next 5 years, but they think of the next 10, 20, 30 years, and things change. I mean, who would have thought in 1979 that 10 years later, you know, the Berlin Wall would have gone down and Europe would change? Nobody. So that's what they're trying to do. But I don't think they're actually going to try to annex it. Iran, it's mostly about nuclear weapons because that's an existential thing for the Israelis. But it's also about um, Iran wishes to be the biggest power in the Middle East, and it's probably the third biggest power after Israel, Saudi, and then Iran. It thinks its mullahs think that God's plan is that the world and Islam should be Shia, and so therefore the two holy cities should be controlled by the Shia, which is why the Saudis and the Israelis will eventually come together, just like all the other countries have come together with Israel. That's the direction of travel. Because what the Iranians very, very brilliantly did over a period of 30 years since the revolution was push, 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 push their influence, get into Lebanon with Hezbollah, get into Damascus with the Alawites, get into Iraq with the Shia, and spread their influence right throughout the Middle East. They did a brilliant job. And then they took their eye off the ball. And crucially, then the Russians, having a bit of local difficulty in Ukraine, took all their troops home. Hezbollah were getting battered by the Israelis, and they all ran off home to try to save Hezbollah in Lebanon. At which point, the Revolutionary Guards from Iran, who were in Iran, thought, "Oh, we better go home as well." So they ran away, leaving the jihadists to come and take the country. Now it's getting back on its feet slowly, God willing. But the Iranians were dealt a massive, massive blow by the fall of Assad. And it will take them another 10 years to rebuild that. And in that 10 years, Israel will try and weaken them.
Well, let's move to another interesting question here from Charlotte, who says, what do you think will happen to the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland in the future?
That's a good one, isn't it? Because,
Yeah,
I hadn't thought of that. When you asked me earlier, Myra, about border changes, and I was
yeah,
going through a mental map. Yeah. And that's demographics, isn't it?
yeah.
I mean, some people say demographics is destiny. I mean, I think they all go into the pot and mix them up. And the troubles are over. God willing, they don't come back. The demographics suggest forgive me for putting it into Protestant and Catholic, because in polite circles they use other words, but that's what it is. It's identity politics. The demographics is that the Catholics will become a clear majority, and the pressure will grow over the years to hold a referendum, and it would probably go to join with Ireland, especially as Ireland is in the EU, and it's very much in Ireland's advantage to be in the EU. They are a net taker, not a net giver. And so, I can see that border changing. I mean, and the Brits would let it go. You know, it's the same as if Scotland had voted to be independent. We would let it go. I mean, this is not, not the Battle of Bannockburn. We're not in that headspace anymore. If Scotland wants to go, it'll go. I don't even think we'd behave the way the Spanish government did in what was it, 10 years ago now? Although that's a very, very complicated constitutional issue, as indeed would be Britain, England, and Scotland. But it's a really good question. I reckon give it 10 years, it'll be on the front burner as a hot issue, and we'll see how that pans out. I mean, it would be very difficult for the people that voted to remain in the United Kingdom to then find themselves not in the United Kingdom. I mean, I'm not saying it would be like the Serbs in Kosovo, but that's an interesting example.
Here's another hot issue, what Roger actually describes as the elephant in the room, climate change. The question is, what does the world map look like with rising seas and people's movements? How does this interrelate with political changes to the world map?
Well, the first thing is politics. And you look at the effect. Climate change pushes people to move. I mean, it's a complicated mix. It's climate change, it's conflict, and it's poverty. But of course, climate change helps to cause violence and poverty. I mean, a good example is the Sahel region in Africa, where the desertification of the Sahara coming down into the Sahel is pushing some of the more nomadic peoples towards the greener areas for their herds. And this is very true in Nigeria, and causes conflict, and then people are moving. And of course, you could choose to move the Democratic Republic of Congo, but you probably wouldn't. You'd probably move north, and people have in large numbers at a rate probably never seen before, at a volume and speed. And you look at the effect it's had on our politics. Now, Britain has often insulated itself from the extremes of Europe. A lot of people think very negative things about this country, and there are, a list as long as your arm of negative things. But it still actually remains among the most open countries and tolerant countries in the world by a country mile. You've got 193 countries, despite all the problems. But if we're going to look at the continent of Europe and see the effect of the politics it's had on there, it's on steroids compared to here. And of course it's affected our politics, and you have to look at the voting patterns. But in Europe, what we regard as the extreme right is on like 33%, 35%. Alternative for Germany, Marine Le Pen's party, people in Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Norway, Austria. I could go on. And I think it's going to get more polarized than it is at the moment because the rate of the flow is not going to decrease. So that's the first thing, politics, which you cannot really divorce from climate change. So if you look at an example like Bangladesh, every year, look at a map of Bangladesh, and very roughly it's like that. These are rivers, okay? This is farmland. So every year, the sea comes up a little bit higher because of climate change, and the salt water comes over, and it salinates the farmland, and that's it. You're done. You can't grow crops. What are you going to do? You're going to move. And so let's look at the politics of India. The ethnic tensions in India between Bangladeshis that have gone there because of climate change, especially in Assam, and the problems that there have been with ethnic clashes and violence. You can root that back to climate change. And of course, most Bangladeshis won't go that way. They will go towards the richer areas. Of course you wouldn't. I would. You look at Nigeria and not Kenya, sorry, South Africa. Now that's not so much climate change, although climate change is impacting Nigeria reasonably heavily. But so many Nigerians go down to South Africa to work. And 2 years ago, the tensions between mostly Zulus, but other Black South Africans, got so great that the attacks on the Nigerians and the violence against the Nigerians was so great that Nigeria had to fly planes down to get them out, to save them. And that's what climate change does. And there'll be examples all over the place of the impact it's having. Another one, coffee growers in Central America in the high ground. Coffee's not growing as well. Crops are lower, can't make a living, come down to the lower ground. There's no jobs there. Head north. And of course, the impact there of the politics, get to the US border, and who's going to get elected if that happens? Donald Trump's going to get elected if that happens. And he was.
It's interesting. Lauren says, studying international politics at university back in the late 1990s in Australia, we were often told how the end of the American empire was coming and that Asia would rise. And it feels like the current US administration, its isolationist policies are triggering that end. Even if cultural imperialism will stay a little longer, do you think that's the case? Or will they remain the big power that we have known them to be in our lifetime?
They will. I mean, I gave some of the very vague ballpark stats earlier about top 10 tech companies, etc., military, R&D, universities, culture, you name it. If you were studying at uni in the early 1970s, it was very fashionable. I wasn't, but it was very fashionable to write America off. That's it, they're done. End of the American century. Vietnam War, they lost. They called it a draw, but they lost. Kent State shootings. For those that don't know, the National Guard was called out to demonstrations at Kent State University in Ohio, shot dead some students. America's falling apart. Riots, Watts riot in Los Angeles, America's falling apart. Bobby Kennedy shot, Martin Luther King is falling apart. Economy falling apart. And then what happened? Takeoff time. You call that a failing country? All right, let's move to now. 2008, as I said before, GDP with the UU level. Now, America's GDP, double the European Union's GDP. Double it. What the hell have they been doing in Europe for the past 15 years? It's not in decline. Why would you say that? Where's your evidence that America is in decline? What is it that just because they've got a very interesting person at the top of the tree? And as for isolationism, they lead NATO, and I think they will stay in NATO and still lead it. That's not isolationist, but they will slap us around until we pay our own way. You go to Japan, they don't think the Americans are isolationist. They're in lockstep with them. You go to the Philippines, who've just done a deal for the basing rights. They're in lockstep with them. And I can name you 50 other countries that are just desperate to be friends with America. I think a lot of people who want America to be in decline, therefore think it is. But wanting a thing to be and then believing it is are two very different things. So I see no evidence that America is in decline.
Mm-hmm. Here's another one from Natalie, and I think we'll just take maybe two more before we finish. It's been so exciting to just hear all of it.
Some of it might be true.
We're almost out of time. Natalie says, "What's your view on the types of future partnerships that the UK should pursue after Brexit?"
That's a tough one.
That's a tough one.
Global Britain, eh? I remember that. It was all going to be sweetness and sunshine and light and the sunny uplands. Well, we're out. We're not going back in for a decade. So, right, what are we going to do? We did a pretty good deal with Japan. They are very, very keen to be a good partner with us. The Poles are very, very keen. The Baltics, very keen. The Scandinavians, they're all very, very keen to be tight with us, economically and militarily, especially militarily, all of those countries I've mentioned. We've managed to get over the hurdle of the space agency, because the European Space Agency has an EU component in it, but it's also European-wide. We have a reasonable relationship with EFTA, the European Free Trade Association. So we just have to keep doing our deals. Yeah, I often am reluctant to say right or wrong or say where I'm coming from, but I voted Remain. I'd vote Remain again. We lost. Okay, get over it and make the best you can of it. So I think it is in those individual deals, but I think it will require a degree of compromise. And it's clear the current administration in the UK is slowly trying to position public opinion to make the compromises required to somehow get back into a form of single market customs union. Not politically, some sort of hybrid between the EFTA and being a full member. The government's clearly positioning the public for that, but that will require compromise. So it's one-off deals on a bilateral basis and make the best we can of it. And then I suspect if the EU is still doing well, which it isn't, if it holds together, which it probably will, although, you know, there's huge numbers of the European public want out. Not a majority, I hasten to add. And you've got countries like Hungary, which are just semi-detached members, and there's 2 or 3 of those. But if it holds together, I think sometime in the 2030s, you might see another referendum.
Well, I mean, the two last questions, I think it's actually important for us to address James's question, which is you said that the news isn't covering the most important stories in the world. What resources would you suggest or recommend that people who are listening could actually keep up to date with
Oh, yeah,
geopolitics?
that's a good question.
Yeah.
I'm not dissing the news. You
You
know,
shouldn't. Some of
yeah,
us are still part of the news.
yeah. If News at 10 started sticking on constant updates on the Northern Sea route, nobody would watch. You know,
Yeah.
I'm not dissing the news. It is broadcasting. But I would recommend going to some of the subscription websites. Do excuse me. There are many. There's Geopolitical Futures. There's the Rain Corporation. And those are both American. There are others. Sajil Gohel, wonderful writer, has the Asia Pacific Foundation. And the guy's brilliant. So I would go to some of the subscription websites, and because they get out, they just put all the noise to one side. Then often not ideological, and I really would recommend not getting an ideological source of news. They just cut through all that noise. They don't come with it that this is right and this is wrong. Because if you approach, oh, that's terrible, you're immediately going to go down that avenue, as opposed to just try to understand what the hell's going on.
Mhm.
So I use a lot of subscription websites. Some of them are about $100 a year. One or two of them are free. Um, just Google diplomacy and this, that, and the
Yeah.
other. And then when you come to a particular situation, now I only speak English, passable French, and I'm trying to learn Italian. So obviously I can't go and read things in the original Hindu or Arabic or whatever. But for example, when Russia Today was on, which I thought was a pretty interesting broadcast outfit, I used to watch it a lot because I know that the Kremlin rings them up every evening and says, these are your headlines. This is the way we're going to frame this story. And so you learn what the Kremlin's attitude and thinking is from watching. I mean, it was the same in France until the late 1970s. The president used to ring up TF1 and say, these are not the president, but you get my drift.
Mhm.
So when there's a certain situation going on, try to get across the local media. Now, it's easier with something like India and to a lesser extent Pakistan, because you can go to the Times of India or whatever, and you can find out the feel of how they are approaching this. And India, Pakistan's a good example, actually, because then you can go to the Pakistan and you can see, because what is going on in their media, you can feel the pressure that is then going on their governments, on their decision making, and of course the pressure from the governments onto the media. And when you learn how to read that, you get a clearer picture of where they are when they're trying to make decisions. So local media, subscription websites, the BBC World Service,
BBC World Service.
where I used to work, wonderful organization which should be better funded, but there we are.
Yeah.
FT is very good on foreign news, but you have to plow through all that business stuff. Um, I mean,
Yeah.
there are many others, but you do also have to read mainstream news because, again, it's the same as the Indian-Pakistan example I gave you. Sorry, I've gone on a bit, and I know you've got one last question. I remember when I was a working journalist, if a foreign correspondent, let's say from France or whatever, came over and we'd go out and chat and whatever, and they'd say, what should I read? And I said, you should read The Sun. And they always, what? I said, read The Sun. Well, why? It's a tabloid. Yeah, sells 5 million copies a day or whatever it was in those days. And particularly, read The Sun Says. Because I know for a fact that everyone in Downing Street reads The Sun Says.
Yeah.
So, and again, people in international affairs are often, I wouldn't say they're snobby, but they're just a bit so high up in the clouds, they got no bloody idea what's going on.
Well, I could say a lot about that, but let's finish. If last question from Dom, if we are successful in commercializing space, which is something you introduced in your book, The
Yeah,
Future of Geography, the idea that future maps will also include space, right?
yeah.
If we are successful in commercializing space and bringing back commodities from space, what might that do to our map of the world?
I don't think it would change the map that much. Right, here we go. Last answer, don't worry. The space race is very similar to what's going on here. The power blocks are the same in cooperation and going up together. The American-led block, the Chinese-led block, and they're after the same kind of minerals precisely because they want the stuff that's pretty rare down here, lithium, which is on the lunar South Pole. Not so much lithium, but titanium, all sorts of stuff there, and in the asteroids. Now we're at least a decade away from this, but you don't start in 2035. You start now. Well, they started a few years ago. So the map of the world, I think, looks similar because it's the advanced industrialized countries that are already in space. They're the only ones who are going to be able to go there and get it.
Mm.
I don't see Zambia there.
Mm-hmm.
Nigeria will try and partner. Nigeria is doing some really interesting stuff in space with CubeSats, but I don't see Mali or Chad or Niger. They're just not going to be there. And so they'll be left behind. And so the map will remain the same. Same with AI. I don't see how you get to be an AI power if well, there are developing countries, but I have a problem with that phrase because some of the countries we call developing countries aren't developing.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chad being, I wish it were not so, but it is. So just as many of them were left behind, and it's not fair, but I'm not sure the world ever was. So it'll be the same in the space race and AI, because for AI, you need so much water to cool the data centers.
Yeah.
And Chad simply hasn't got, well, it's got the lake, but it simply hasn't got that sort of water. So they're not going to get those minerals. Hopefully we can share them out once we've set ourselves up, I hope.
Mm.
But they're not going to get the minerals and they're not going to have the AI data. Last bit on this, sorry. What's interesting is that the map of the moon might change because there is a slow race, if there's such a thing, to get to the lunar South Pole where the water is and where most of the minerals are, around about the Shackleton mountain area, crater, sorry. And you'll set up shop there. And you probably remember the phrase, the flag follows the trade. So when the trade gets up there, let's say Musk, or the Japanese, they're doing great guns, the Japanese, UAE, big space power, Italy, Britain, Germany, France. The flag will follow, and we will begin to colonize space, plant our flags, plus ça change, les mêmes choses. And I'm sanguine about it all, because
Yeah.
'twas ever thus. I think the world's better now than it was 400 years ago, 300 years ago, 200 years ago, 100 years ago. Whether it's as every day as going to the dentist, you'd rather go now. And
Yeah.
to the doctor, and to all the rest of it, and to the tap that you turn on. So for all those things that we've been discussing for the last hour, which are depressing, most of them,
Yeah.
you have to hang on to the fact, actually, it's better now than it used to be.
Yeah. And I mean, before we finish, I think I have one more question since we are still on the topic of space. I know John's kind of itching to jump in.
He's got a
But
hook.
I think it's only right that we finish with probably a fun question. So this is for you, Tim. It's next week or 2 weeks from now, you are checking your email and combing through what I imagine are lots of letters from fans and maybe
No,
some work from your
you're mistaking
publicist
that for
as
the hate
well.
mail.
Well, okay, there we are. But then you're going through them and you find an email, right, from, again, imagination, which is part of maps as well, from Elon Musk. And he says, Tim, we want to give you an opportunity to get on the Crew Dragon and head out to space. What would you say and why?
Yes,
Wow.
because it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. I hope I'm thinking, yeah, that's not the one that's going all the way to Mars.
No.
I might say no to that. But if you're talking about going up and God willing,
Yes.
coming back in a heartbeat, I would say yes. And then I'm reminded of Elon Musk's famous phrase. He said, I want to die on Mars, just not on impact, which I quite liked. No, I'd go in a heartbeat. Every single astronaut that's ever gone up has had their spiritual emotions, for want of a better word, heightened. And they've all come back with this vision of the future of oneness. That's one I like about Star Trek. It's the upside of intergalactical warfare. At last, we would all be one. There wouldn't be any us and them. We would all be one at last. And I kind of like, I mean, I have that feeling anyway, up to a point, except for my new fans.
Okay.
No offense to your husband.
It's
No,
getting
I've got that
personal.
feeling anyway. But if it was free, because it's 400 grand, you have to
Yes,
pay
of course.
the other chap, Bezos. If it's free, because I'm from Yorkshire, if it was free, and I could go up,
You'd be
I'd
there.
do it in a heartbeat. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
What
Thanks for
I'm
the
saying,
questions.
thank you, yeah. And what I'm actually saying is thank you, Tim, Gordon, Ramsey, Marshall, for walking us through both the astro and geopolitical kitchen, Hell's Kitchen, shall I call it, of Earth and space, and showing us that some ingredients could lead the world to boiling point, but others can actually help turn it around. So thank you for giving us a taste of what the future
Thank you, Myra.
map of the world might look like. Thank you all.
Thank you.
And thank you also from the British Library. Do come and check out the maps exhibition. As I say, it's on until the 18th of January. What a great evening. And thank you for everybody who joined us and all the excellent questions. Myra, it's great to have you with us. And Tim also. We do live in interesting times, but that means that we can expect plenty more books from Tim. He's not going to run out of material anytime soon. So anyway, thank you once again, and have a safe journey home, and probably just your kitchens to get a nice cup of tea. Thank you very much. Bye for now.
Thank you.